Good morning. My name is Raben. I'm the Director General of SMR, and I'm absolutely delighted and thrilled to be part of this very innovative and to some degree funky, I guess, new session on various topics. So Ray, thank you very much for having me along to this. And I thought I'd start just by giving everyone a small summary about SMR, what it is, what it does, where it came from, and what hopefully then we are trying to do both in the short, medium, and long term. So if you bear with me, I'll run you through about 6 or 7 slides, and then we can move into the discussion with Ray. So firstly, let me just start off by saying, who is SMR, or posing the question, who is SMR? The strapline that we like to use most regularly is that SMR is the essential organization for encouraging, advancing, and elevating market research worldwide. Now that may sound a little grand in certain terms, but fundamentally what we try to do is to facilitate the exchange of knowledge through various different formats, but facilitate the exchange of knowledge to make what we do better and to guide people in terms of what the emerging technologies, what the latest thinking, and what best practice is in research. Part of that, and which I'll come on to in a moment, is also about trying to guide that thinking amongst the younger generation, so those that follow on behind us and who will fundamentally become the cornerstone of our industry in the coming years. So how old is SMR? Well, SMR was founded back in 1948. It was set up by 29 delegates who came together at a meeting in Amsterdam, which is where we are now currently based. They, in chatting amongst themselves and in looking at the industry, felt that there were 3 critical theories, philosophies, cornerstones that they wanted to build an association around and to support. Those 3 themes were firstly to promote research as a crucial part of any effective management, be that within the industry itself or indeed in the end user industries, whatever they may be. Secondly, to further the professional interest of members, so to somehow set up a quality standard, if you like, to say if you're part of this group, then you can trust us and we work to a certain standard. And finally, it was to be absolutely and categorically non-political, so that it was, if you like, to paraphrase Abraham Lincoln, a society of researchers, for researchers, and by researchers. The society today numbers almost 5,000 individual members from both client-side businesses as well as research institutions to be found in more than 100 countries globally. The industries that are represented range from, on the one hand, drinks industries to, on the other hand, biochemical industries. We have academic professors, we have collegiate institutions, we have advertising agencies, we have media agencies, and we even have some governmental departments. The services that SMR tries to provide include any mechanism by which we can distribute or disseminate thinking about the industry. Now that may be through things such as the ICC SMR International Code, one of the fundaments of the society and the cornerstone of the quality standards which SMR sets. It could be the Global Market Research Report, something that SMR produces annually in conjunction with all of the research associations and our representatives globally in trying to put forward a measure of what the industry is. Or it could, as we have just recently been delighted to collaborate with Ray on, be the production of textbooks or, if you like, authoritative books on new facets of the industry that to date have not been covered. So any of those things are what SMR tries to get involved in to help further, if you like, the interest and the benefits of the industry. Our activities can broadly be separated into 4 pillars. There is the fundamental membership. Since 1948, and those 29 members, as I said, it's now almost 5,000. And for those members who sign up to SMR and do therefore sign up to follow our code, there are membership certificates. They're allowed to use a membership mark on their correspondence, which identifies them as following a certain ethical and quality standard. We have local representatives in each of our countries who try to facilitate debate and exchange in events within those countries. Again, just to promote the industry and to promote the debate and the exchange that is necessary for our industry to keep evolving. We have a whole section dedicated to professional standards. As I said, the fundament of that is the ICC, the International Chamber of Commerce, or SMR code. We liaise with the ISO industry. We provide guidelines on most of the mechanisms and types of research that we do, be that online, be it social media, be it telephone. And we have recently increased our resources in relation to public affairs. More and more governmental agencies, and particularly legislative bodies that are tied to both the European Union, as well as, for example, the Federal Trade Commission in the US, or other bodies in other parts of the world, are looking to legislate and protect consumer rights. That takes various different forms, but we as SMR try to put forward the case for the research industry and, where necessary, defend it and alternatively promote it. There are therefore equally professional standards that we try to uphold. Where those standards are reported to us as not having been upheld, there is a disciplinary committee to impose sanctions where possible or where relevant or where appropriate. And finally, we have a legal affairs group which also tends to bring the industry together to look at what are the key issues that face both the larger and smaller players in the industry. Our Developing Talent program is all about trying to train the next generation of researcher, and I won't go through all of these in detail, but it is one of the most important things I think that we do today. The industry is evolving and expanding in terms of its technical application every day. And people coming into the industry today need a much broader set of skills than possibly they did 30, 40 years ago. One of our key objectives is to ensure that broadening of the mind and that broadening of expertise is facilitated in as many countries as is humanly possible. And finally, the communication, which is all about how we talk to people, how we facilitate that exchange. Mainly it's done by conferences, either international ones or local ones, but we also have started to do a number of webinars. We do a number of local meetings arranged by representatives. We have a magazine called Research World. We produce a handbook. And this year, something that we haven't necessarily done that much of before, we have started to venture into the social media world. And I think we'll talk about that a little bit later with Ray. Just to give you an idea of what importance we place on the code, which is our fundament, this is now adopted or endorsed by over 53 associations in 45 countries. In addition to international associations, ephemera and AMRI also endorse this code, and it provides the benchmark, if you like, as far as we're concerned, given that it can be independently audited on market research standards. Now, that's, I guess, a very brief 5-minute summary of what SMR does. Some of the very kind of hot topics that we're currently dealing with are all around privacy. So what is private information? What is personal information? What should be considered private and what should not? Social media practices, because obviously social media enables and facilitates the collection of a vast amount of information, much, much more than I think has ever been available before. And as somebody once very aptly put it, the opportunities are limitless. So perhaps where should the limits be? Emerging technologies, whether we're talking about neuroscience, biometrics, or any of the kind of the really interesting and funky developments that are coming along. How do we incorporate those into the portfolio of services that research can offer? And finally, mobile. Now, some may say, well, kind of mobile's almost a past it issue. But if you look at a place like Africa, they have completely bypassed not only fixed line or broadband internet, they've also completely bypassed the PC. And everything that is done in Africa needs to be facilitated through smartphones, through handheld devices. So that in and of itself is an enormous area of opportunity for us, but also an area in which we would like to be able to facilitate more debate and exchange on. So perhaps enough about what we do and what we maybe don't do. Let's now turn to the discussion and look forward to having it. And Ray, let's go for it, as they say.
Okay, thanks for that, Finn. That was really useful. I just want to run through a few questions. So perhaps the first one is, what do you think the main challenges of social media are for organizations like SMR?
Well, from an application perspective, SMR has been very slow in coming to the social media world. So internally, we need to get our kind of stuff sorted out on that front. I think we have shown that we're probably not as effective on social media as we ought to be. And that certainly is one of the challenges that our communications team here have to take on board going forward. For the industry, I think it's, take an example such as Buzzmetrics, where, as I mentioned earlier, the opportunities are limitless, and yet you don't know when you've crossed the limit until you're already past it. I think Buzzmetrics certainly found that out in the case of patients like me. Now, what therefore do we as an industry have to do? What are the impacts, firstly? Well, I think if we show that we are not aware of those limits, then that pulls the entire industry down, because whether we like it or not, even if we decide to completely disassociate ourselves from companies like Buzzmetrics, it reflects on market research. And there, I think, associations like SMR, in collaboration with the national associations, need to be able to set up a series of, if only preliminary or draft, boundaries to say, look, beyond this point, it starts to impact upon us as an industry, and we really shouldn't be doing that kind of stuff. So I think that's the first point. The second point is that social media, or perhaps more accurately things like web scraping, bring a whole new perspective to the collection of data. Market research has always and very traditionally been founded on permission, and it doesn't matter whether it was a qualitative group or whether it was a face-to-face interview. You always asked permission. The ability to scrape stuff off the web no longer requires that implicit or explicit consent from people who have contributed their views in the past. And that is a fundamental, what that wonderful phrase, a fundamental paradigm shift in our industry. And I think for SMR and again for the national associations, we need to be able to understand how that is either incorporated, defined, or in certain cases perhaps excluded from the industry going forward.
Thank you, Finn. Quick leading question. Is this an area that SMR is looking into in terms of code of conduct and such on?
Yes.
Is there anything that you can say about that at the moment, or is that all just happening behind the scenes?
No, on the contrary, there is a working party that are already drafting guidelines on social media. We know equally that other associations around the world are also drafting guidelines, and we are in discussions with all of them in order to try and align our thinking as best we possibly can.
I think it would be great if there was a lot of coordination. That's very encouraging to hear. One would not like to see a whole set of new but different guidelines coming out. One of the things that I see on, there are many LinkedIn groups for market researchers, some of them with thousands of members, and it's not unusual to get a discussion going on there saying, where is SMR? Why are SMR not listening to this conversation? Don't they care about online media? So what is your position in terms of being involved in these many, many groups online?
Well, two things, I guess. One, you make a very valid point about us having, and perhaps still being accused of not listening, which I think is a fair criticism of SMR, up until recent times. I think as a general standard and as a general positioning, SMR felt that perhaps it always knew best and dictated to its members rather than listened to them more. I'd like to think, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that is something we are now fundamentally trying to change. It is very important for us, so that we stay relevant, to listen to what our members want. Why aren't we perhaps more apparent on social media? Well, I think I just need to refer back to my earlier point, Ray. SMR has never been in social media before. We're feeling our way a little bit on it now. We have tended to do things to date perhaps in a less coordinated way than perhaps ought to be, and our communications team have very much been challenged with trying to get that right and straightened out going forward. So it's not that we're not listening. We are. We may not be contributing as much as perhaps people feel we ought to, but that's more something that we need to get sorted out internally rather than us not wanting to contribute.
Well, that sounds very encouraging, I must say. And I certainly have seen some evidence of it myself, so that's great news. Moving on now to a concern. There's a large amount of discussion in the industry about DIY research, non-research companies coming into the research industry, especially in some of the new research areas, data mining and places like that. There's the ongoing discussion about the lack of formal rigor that underpins online research, quantitative research panels and all of that. Do you think our concerns are simply one of those cyclical things that the research industry does, or is there a real change going on?
Great question. I guess the easy answer is it's a little bit of everything, really, isn't it? Fundamentally, I think our business is evolving, and as with all evolutionary changes, there is a pain. Pain is perhaps the wrong word, but there is a pain of change involved in that. Certainly, technology has enabled and advanced what we as market researchers do phenomenally in the last 10 to 15 years. I mean, you know, the internet alone revolutionized our business, and you now look at kind of the software applications on top of that, and you know, some might validly posit that you can do stuff with software today and with PCs and via automated means that we as researchers needed to do 20, 25 years ago. Is it cyclical? I think that certainly when we move into tough times, as we're hopefully now coming out from, there is always an additional emphasis perhaps on rigor. When clients invest money into market research, they do want to feel assured that what they're buying is of an acceptable standard. And that does place an increased emphasis, I think, on rigor. However, I think what we're currently witnessing is a little bit of a mix of all of those things. Traditional research, and I use that term a little bit loosely, but if you look at something like the Global Market Research Report that we produce, approximately a quarter of the market is online. 75% of the market is offline. And if I broadly use the word traditional to cover that 75%, it's still by far and away the bulk of what we do. That's not to say that all of the fun, funky, exciting, and interesting developmental stuff isn't happening. It is, and it's in that 25%. But I think what we as an industry need to come to terms with is that perhaps either the size of the playing field or maybe the game rules have changed. And I refer back again to the point about privacy, or about, you know, what should we and should we not be doing, given that we now have these new means of either communicating with people or collecting information. And that is, I think, game-changing, whether it's in relation to the rigor that is required, or whether it's in relation to the way we apply it. But I think there is a debate and a necessity for us to perhaps look at the definitions that we've used in the past and understand whether or not they're still valid and applicable.
Super. Final one, which is always the fun question. If you were to look forward 10 years, Finn, what do you think SMR might look like? What would be the key things you think would really be good if they were the same, and what would be really good if they were different and new?
Gosh, I think what we would like to achieve in the next, you know, and hopefully not the next 10 years, Ray, you know, we need to continue to modernize SMR, and I think certainly, excuse me, our incoming president, because as you know, our council will change in the new year, our incoming president is very much of a similar philosophy, that we do need to continue to modernize SMR. But I think where we would like to be is that we'd like to be the first point of contact for any question that people may have in relation to research. Now, that question may be from a student who is saying, look, I'm thinking of following course X because I want to get into market research. And by the way, slight side point, wouldn't it be fantastic if we got a young generation who actually held up their hand and said, hey, market research is the industry I want to be in? How many of us of our generation can actually, you know, hold up our hands and say that? So wouldn't that be a fantastic development? But whether it's a student looking to take some guidance on what courses they should do or what their career path should be, whether it's from a new researcher or a young researcher in an emerging market who wants some guidance on a particular methodology or an application, whether it's an end client who wants some guidance on what particular application is best suited to his commercial needs. I'd love SMR to be top of mind in saying, well, let me ask SMR, because they have one of the broadest, remit is perhaps the wrong word, but they have the broadest knowledge base that might be able to help me answer that question. That fundamentally is what we want to be able to provide to our members, that we become the point of information and hopefully reference for any queries in relation to the market research industry.
In that context, Finn, do you think that maybe the size of membership is not that important? Because I kind of wonder whether maybe in 10 years we should be looking at an SMR membership of 10,000 or something. But your vision would seem to be almost independent of membership. You could achieve that with a membership of 2,000 or 8,000 or 16,000. You could still be the point of reference.
You're right, but I should perhaps have clarified that I think if we become that point of reference, then SMR stays relevant. And relevance is the word that we have used, certainly for the past 12 months since I started here, and the one that we will continue to kind of hammer into the minds and hearts of people that work here as to what we should be offering the industry. And my belief is that if you're relevant to the industry, then you will automatically, if you like, drive membership. So it's not as if we're putting a target on the membership to say, we're now 5,000 and we want to be 10,000 in 2 years' time. I think if we continue, or perhaps as some might criticize and say, well, no, you can't continue because you haven't started it yet. But if we provide a relevant service to all of our members, then the membership will grow. And if the membership grows and we continue to provide those services, then again, I'll be happy.
Finn, thank you so much. And without wishing to be in the least bit critical of any of your predecessors, I think that many of us find you a breath of fresh air, and we will tell you if that ever finishes. But thank you so much for this morning's session.
Ray, thanks a million. It was an absolute pleasure. And yes, please do tell me when I become stale air rather than fresh air, because, like the organization, I can't change unless I'm being told what I'm doing wrong. So all comments, good and bad and ugly, very welcomed. Thanks again.